Welcome to the Town Administrator Update. I'm Phil Gallagher along with our usual guest, Town Administrator Paul Sagarino.
How you doing, Phil? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being accessible as usual. You're coming off of town meeting and then you're going to be going from the frying pan into the fire with the budget, but let's start with a little bit of a review of town meeting. The mixed use initiative seemed to be the not controversial, but the most interesting or most interested of the participants. This was somewhat unusual in that it was an initiative presented by the Town Economic Development Office under your direction, as opposed to the Planning Board. What was the impetus for this, and what will it do for the town?
Well, credit must be given to our Economic Development Director, Melissa Tintakoulis. This was her brainchild, and there was over 2 years of work and effort put into this, and literally hundreds of public meetings and outreach to the community. And really what the goal was is as we saw during COVID, we have a real issue with our commercial property in town, and the changes on the way people work in working from hybrid situations. And we saw a real need to focus on our commercial area of town, just to make sure that we can maintain the vitality of that area going forward. I think we all know that the Mall Road area provides a boatload of taxes towards the community services, and reduces the burden on our residents' tax bills. So kudos to Melissa. It was really an effort to enliven this area, and I think in fairness we have a really good example from the past with the Northwest Park redevelopment. Not quite the same thing, whereas that was sort of put forth by the developer. But at the same time, I think we've seen how that area was transformed over the past almost 20 years now, and it's still only about 50% built out according to what they talked about back then. So
that's a 25-year build out.
Yeah, and I mean likewise with the Mall Road. We don't anticipate there to be radical transformation overnight, but we do think that it's a step in the right direction, where over time we'll be able to provide vitality to our commercial properties in that area, and that's really what the goal is. It will involve some housing in that area, and I think that Northwest Park has shown a pretty good example that how housing works in that area, in those commercial areas where folks are looking for that work, live, eat lifestyle. And I think we have a pretty good model of how it works right here in town, and we hope to extend that over to the mall area.
Isn't housing there's always going to be a need for housing in Burlington because people want to live here, irrespective of what the marketplace is outside of the town of Burlington?
I agree 100%, and I'm certainly not a person that wants to see apartments built just for the reasons for just apartments being built. I mean, many folks moved to Burlington because they wanted a single-family character to their neighborhoods. But I think what town meeting has shown us is that they've been very receptive to apartment buildings in other areas where it's not going to be a direct impact to the neighbors, where it's in a commercial area taking up space in a parking lot, and how it enhances the area around it by providing liveliness to the area. So I think like many towns, folks moved here for a single family environment, and I think our town meeting has been very protective of that and not allowing apartment buildings in the residential neighborhoods. But I am happy to see that there has been an openness and receptiveness to apartments and how they can enhance our commercial properties and sort of keep those areas lively.
Okay, and reduce traffic by on-site edge city type of approach to development.
No, absolutely, and we've seen it be effective in other areas of the country. And again, I think we have a pretty good example of how it works with what Nodblom has done down at 3rd Ave. I remember driving around the town during the depths of the pandemic and being pretty disappointed, wow, we're taking over at the beginning of the fall of Rome here, because the town was empty. And I was really encouraged when I went up to Northwest Park, and there were folks separated, but a lot of liveliness up there. Folks working on laptops outside, people jogging in a commercial district, and it was completely different from the other areas of town, which were completely abandoned. So,
now, as an adjunct to that, in a different initiative, came from the planning board, which is the accessory housing, accessory units.
Yep.
AUDs, accessory units.
ADUs.
ADUs, okay. This is a different approach in terms of value to the taxpayer, enabling them to take advantage of development on their own property.
Yeah, I mean, this is the long-standing in-law apartment situation. The state actually made it a statewide law that we have to allow these, and what I think our planning board and planning department did was they put together some guardrails in accepting and what we could do to modify what the state told us was now the law. So I think they very smartly put some guardrails in there, but I know that these have existed, let's say, informally in many places in town over the years, and if you think about it, it actually is a really good situation if you can get a senior member of your family, a small living space attached to your own housing unit. Hopefully that person is selling a house that then becomes available for a young family to buy, and it keeps sort of the cycle going. And I grew up in a multifamily with family on each level, so it really was a great experience growing up to have all the generations sort of nearby and people able to help each other out, help out your aging grandparents at the time, and the aging grandparents can help out with the young kids. So it could be a really good situation, and I think it was pretty well received by town meeting. Again, the overall concerns were impact on parking on streets, which is something we need to pay attention to.
But it also enables entry level or entry into the marketplace when you have a new buyer who has the potential for on-site rental income that might offset the cost of a mortgage.
No, absolutely. We've all seen a cost of a house in Burlington here is extraordinary. A lot of people want to live here, and hopefully it provides a way for folks that may not be able to afford that standalone house on their own. Maybe give them an additional option to raise some revenue towards that, and maybe it makes it an affordable situation for them.
Right. Now, another big issue was cybersecurity. What went on there? I think it was a 5-year contract. Where do we stand in terms of cybersecurity? We've heard the horror stories. Franklin, a number of corporations have been swindled. I guess that's the word. Where are we in that in terms of our firewall?
Well, Burlington's really been blessed. Several years ago, town meeting formed a cybersecurity committee, which is made up of extremely talented residents within the town who work in this field, and we've been able to access their expert advice in terms of how to deal with cybersecurity threats. I'd like to say that I feel like that we've put in we're advanced in terms of other communities. I mean, I don't want to tempt fate. These hackers are pretty.
One step ahead sometimes.
Yeah, they're pretty much one step ahead, but I think that we've taken very strong steps to safeguard the town, thanks to the ISAC committee. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that we all know. All someone has to do is click on the wrong email, and we could really have a problem with the system. But a lot of what they've taught us is not just the fact of getting hacked, it's how you're able to respond that and get essential services up and running quickly is something that we're constantly working on in terms of cybersecurity. The appropriation you referenced was the town's 5-year technology lease, so it does include portions for cybersecurity, but this is something, I think it's the 3rd iteration of that, where we do a 5-year plan and we get a several $1 million investment up front, and it's a 0% lease over 5 years, and we're able to update our network capabilities, and a chunk of that is cybersecurity now as well. But since that plan has been instituted, I feel like that we have top of the line technology and networks compared to other municipalities, and that was Superintendent Conti's brainchild when he first came in here, that we need to start treating our technology costs almost like a utility, almost like electricity, heating oil, telephone. It's here to stay. The whole town functions on computers, so we need to constantly be investing in our network to make sure it's safe, to make sure it's reliable. And in the past, prior to that, we used to look at technology more as buy it all and then worry about it, once it starts becoming non-functional. So it's an annual investment in our network. So we're really pleased with it.
Now, marijuana came up. It's been a thorn, perhaps, in the individual member of the community as a proponent of this. The argument for tax income as a result, and other people are buying. Other municipalities have them, the dispensaries. This was a flip-flop vote, I think. Went 44-42, and then went 42-44 on the roll call. Is it on the ballot in May for a suggestion? What do they call it?
Yeah, non-binding referendum. So yes, the select board at a meeting or two prior to town meeting had voted to ask the town clerk to put that on the town's annual election warrant. So there will be a non-binding question to ask the town how they feel about the marijuana question moving forward. So I know many of the boards and committees had their own opinions as to how to move forward, but they wanted to hear from more of the residents and get a better sampling of what does the community really think about this. The town did vote to not allow it years ago, and I think that many of the boards and committees I saw, and even some of the town meeting folks debating it, I feel like wanted more information from the residents of the town. So hopefully that question will provide it.
It's quite a tricky issue from the national sense, in that it's still illegal in the United States, right? The federal law is in opposition to it. What is the possibility that this whole thing could be wiped out at some point in time when the feds intervene?
It's an interesting question. I do see, at least nationwide, more of a trend to allow it in more states. So perhaps it'll be something where it'll be a state's option in time. I know it created some challenges with the banking industry.
Yes,
and I think a lot of these folks couldn't even have bank accounts because it was technically outlawed drug money that they were harvesting. But I think that some of that has been relaxed over time, and it's not a cash business anymore. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the residents feel about this as we move forward.
Right. Now, there was a large appropriation for abatement defense fund. Explain to us what that was.
Sure, that's a fund that the assessors draw upon when we go to court with a taxpayer that's contesting the value of their property. Typically, some of the commercial ones can become in pretty substantial cases, and what that allows the assessor's office to do is to hire expert witnesses and appraisers to help defend the town's values. So we've always supported our assessors in their efforts. I think if you look at the track record, they've had a great record of defending the town's values. And again, our commercial values in particular are really important. So it may seem like it's one case that, we're fighting over, but, if it's a retail outlet, then that could potentially negatively impact other retail properties in the town in terms of what we value them at. So I think the assessors have done a great job. They have a great success rate, and the amount of money given back due to improper valuations is really minuscule when you consider the size and the value of all the property in town. I think they've done a great job.
Any abatement requests?
Yeah. They've been fairly typical despite COVID. Over time, yeah.
Okay, well, that leads to the next question. We're in year 3 post-COVID, really, in terms of everybody ramping back up. And it was anticipated that, particularly with work at home, that there would be more and more vacancies. What are we seeing for vacancies? What are we seeing as a result a drop in values of particular abatement requests?
Well, like I say, I think that the assessors have consistently been ahead of the trends. I think they saw the storm coming here in relation to commercial property. At last check, I think we're looking at about a 20% vacancy rate in our office buildings, which is, not unlike other areas of Massachusetts, but certainly not a good number.
Quite significant for us.
Significant given the breadth and scope and the amount of we have a lot of office property here in town. And again, a lot of our initiatives have been sort of around that and how do we keep those properties viable if folks don't return to the office. I mean, we have seen a lot of discussion at the state and federal level and private companies where they want people to go back to some form of showing up in the office. I do feel that the hybrid situation seems to be what most people are focusing on, maybe with a couple days at home and more days in the office. And I think that a lot of companies are realizing what they're missing by having completely remote workforces that don't get to collaborate in person, that don't get the camaraderie of knowing the folks that they're working with on a project, and don't get that the water cooler type of innovation that happens
particularly
at
for
companies.
the young people, younger workers.
Yeah, I mean, think of if a kid graduated before COVID, they may have never worked in an office with their coworkers before. They may have never met them in person. And I think you lose something over time with that. So I think that's going to be interesting going forward. So what we hope is, that what we've seen is that companies aren't necessarily abandoning their office space, but they're right-sizing it for the new reality. So they're taking less space and they're setting it up more where folks don't have their own offices or their own cubicles. It's just sort of like a hoteling type system where you show up and they assign you a room to work in. So
now, one of the things that have been bandied about in the national real estate market is the transition of these office buildings to residential condos or rentals, etc. Are we seeing that as a possibility for Burlington, or is new build more likely?
Yeah, I think it's new build, and if you just think of the basics on what an office building is, it's usually a very large open space with windows on the outside. So if you're going to convert that to residential, it's a difficult thing to do because residential apartments, people want windows. They want natural light coming in. If you think of your typical office building, you would have an apartment, very deep, long hallway type apartment with a few windows on the end of it. So a lot of the buildings, just as they're constructed, are not well suited for this purpose. I do think that there's significant money to modify them to make them available for apartments. I think downtown Boston had a big initiative with their commercial sector to try to encourage people to transform them into apartments, but at the same time, it wasn't an easy task, and I think that there was a few that were suitable for it that have moved forward, but it seems like a very logical thing to solve some of the housing problems that we have in the state, but in practice, it's a little bit more difficult than it may seem, just because of some of those.
Okay, two more questions for you. One is the police station. I know that the planning board has approved, but you've still got some more hurdles to jump relative to the Conservation Commission based on the location of that property. Where are we in the transition of the police department down there? Yeah,
so Conservation actually approved the plan as well several weeks prior.
Okay.
If you think about, we're not really changing much of what we're doing on the Vinebrook. We're talking about the Vinebrook temporary police station.
Yeah, that's what I should have prefaced that in my question.
The envelope of the building isn't going to change. Most of the renovations will occur on the interior. We've agreed to not use any non-permeable materials, so we're going to use gravel and things of that nature so that we don't, in the parking areas, so that we don't negatively impact, the Vinebrook and the marsh and all that stuff down there. So because the use that we're proposing down there isn't really significantly different from what's already there, we're able to, with very little difficulty, sort of move those projects through both of those boards, and they were very helpful in their feedback to us in terms of making it happen. It is a temporary use, and then I suppose the town will have to decide what they want to do with the facility in the future. It's a great building. It's been well maintained. It will be upgraded with office space in it for the police department, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to use our own facility as opposed to renting an office building someplace. At least at the end of the day, after the investment, we have a viable facility down there for something in the future.
Repurposing, sure.
Yeah.
I lied. Actually, I have two questions. The funding for the transition, it's $51 million, I think, for the police station and $81 million for the Fox Hill. Have you gone to bond anticipation notes for the police department? The Fox Hill is a little bit later on down the line. What do you see for the debt schedule coming up?
Well, town meeting allowed us to use some free cash, which is something that was talked about as we were proposing those projects to town meeting. Just a police station was 46, so expensive enough without making it 51. But at the same time, that question was asked by town meeting many times. We have free cash available. Why aren't we using some of it? And our response to that was, we will start to, infuse free cash into the projects as we're financing it. So at the last town meeting was able to provide us with $5 million towards each of those projects, and what that'll allow us to do is not borrow $5 million. So we basically took it out of our savings account to fund some of those, to fund those two projects, and both of the projects will have several years of short-term borrowing going forward before they're finally bonded. So we're just at the beginning of that
and we're
situation.
seeing a declining interest rate environment, hopefully. Lastly, out of the frying pan into the fire, you finished the January meeting. You're already in deep in terms of the budget process. The Burlington budget process is almost like herding kittens, right? Got a number of disparate boards, you got a bunch of different departments. How does the budget process begin, and how does it end in May?
Well, it starts out, as you mentioned, there's no real determination in the town's guiding documents as to who decides what the budget's going to be. So it's more of a collaboration amongst our larger departments and their boards to try to work together to try to come up with something that's feasible, that allows us to maintain services, that is fair to the taxpayers in town, and that it will meet the muster of town meeting. So it's a very interesting process with many different voices heard from, and I think that we've been very successful despite the difficulties of really not having a final authority on the budget. Town meeting's the ultimate authority, but how do we get there? We don't want to go to a town meeting with 4 different versions of budgets based upon different people's opinion, and that's what makes it sort of difficult and unique, but it's really worked for us because I think that many of the departments have really learned what the challenges of the town are, and understand that there's a limit to what the taxpayers will be able to provide us on a year-to-year basis, and it's worked out pretty successfully considering it's a difficult process over the years. So it starts out with a little bit of what we call the budget summit, where we hear from a couple of elected officials that represent different boards and what their needs are for the upcoming year. Select board tries to weigh in with what they see as the limit that they're willing to raise taxes, and then we sort of collaborate from there and try to work together to come up with something that, again, allows us to maintain services, but at the same time is fair and reasonable to the taxpayers. So we had that meeting. Everybody's in support of a very similar budget guideline to what we had for the previous year.
Which is what, 4.23?
The levy for the tax levy to rise no more than 5%.
Right.
We're able to meet that, and operating budgets at 4.5%. And again, that's pretty unique times right now. Collective bargaining agreements are higher than they've been, in the years that I've been here. So in order to accommodate,
this all has inflation, of course.
Inflation and accommodate those new contracts, the 4.5% was decided on in order to try to maintain services in the departments. Tonight we actually start off with the first meeting with the Ways and Means Committee. We call it sort of the budget overview, so we'll be providing them with all the town side budget documents for all the departments that demonstrate that we meet the guideline.
Okay, so the departments have already assembled their budget requests at this point.
Oh yeah, they're typically ready very, very early. They're pretty good at it at this point, and they're ready to go before we are. Typically, they understand what's going to impact their departments in the upcoming year, and we have those discussions. John and I meet with all the departments, and we try to put together, something that fits in the guidelines, so that we can go to Ways and Means and say, hey, here's a budget here. It meets the guideline that we set, and you can be confident to know that, by approving these budgets, we'll be on target to what we hope to accomplish at the beginning of the year. So start of the long process begins tonight. Ways and Means will be going through.
So these are the individual subcommittees for each department, right?
Subcommittees will have an in-depth review with each department on the entire budget. They'll bring it back to a full committee vote. We'll tabulate all those full committee votes, and we'll bring it to town meeting in May. And unfortunately, then set the tax rate in November. So it's a big cycle that goes on every year, and it seems crazy probably to the private citizen, but
Well, thank you for joining us, and good luck in herding kittens.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for joining us.